Hello. In this video, I'm going to go over some tips for JavaScript. And this is JavaScript in particular, not TypeScript. But I will briefly mention TypeScript. So, let's get right into it. Tip number 1. Embrace the anarchy. So you have to remember that JavaScript was invented in 10 days by Brendan Eich, who was basically paid by Netscape to rip off Java, and they even named it Java, but there's no actual connection to Java. It was supposed to be Lisp, but because they needed to make it like Java, they decided to make it not a Lisp, and instead this thing, whatever it is. And JavaScript's a pretty cool language because of the way you can just throw around objects. So everything in JavaScript is kind of an object, which is basically key value. And you can throw those around without ever instantiating new types, like a class. So I think that's actually kind of a cool way of coding. And I'll talk more about it in later tips. But just be comfortable with BSing, basically. You're not going to make pretty code. It's not going to be very well abstracted, but it's going to go fast. You're going to be able to write it fast, and it's going to work. And it's going to work everywhere because everyone has a browser that has JavaScript. So comfortable with just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Okay. Second tip. Check the date on Stack Overflow. What do I mean by this? In previous tip videos, I've talked about how Stack Overflow can be a pretty dangerous place to go if you have a problem. But with JavaScript specifically, the language has changed so much in the last 20 years that you have to be careful that you're not looking at a post from 2013. Because it's going to be, the snippets that you copy and paste from 2013 are going to work, but there's probably a better way to do it that's been introduced into the language since then. Also, since JavaScript is probably the most asked and answered language on something like Stack Overflow, you always look for a better source. So always get a second opinion for a second opinion, because you'll probably find one. There's very few things that you're trying to do in JavaScript that somebody else hasn't tried to do. It's pretty, your problems are pretty non-unique. Okay, 3. This one's going to get a little more technical. Use anonymous functions to initialize complex data. And let me explain what I mean by this. This is where JavaScript beats out something like Python in a lot of ways. So let's say you want an array of even numbers, you want to cache your even numbers, maybe from 1 to 100 or something. So you could say var evens equals empty list, and then you could write a for loop is less than 50. So say, and then you could say evens dot push I times 2. You could do this, and there's nothing wrong with doing this, but the first problem is that evens is not const. And we've now done quite a bit of logic in the global scope, which we want to avoid. We don't want to clutter the global scope. So what you can do instead of this is you're going to actually do this. So then it's const evens equals, and then you're going to initialize the function, and then you're going to call that function out on the spot. So you're basically creating an anonymous function and calling it on the spot, and this function here, you can do something like this. You can put this all in here, and then boom. So this is a lot cleaner in my opinion, and it results in a constant variable. Then you can pretty much initialize any complex data in here. So you could, you could return all kinds of stuff. You could return a full object. Returning objects out of functions is great. Whoops. Do something like that. You do anything, the world's your oyster. This pattern is really useful, cleans up your code, and nicely allows you to sort of even extract this out. So if you want to evolve your code, you could say, okay, actually I want this to be its own thing. Now it's a named function. Now it's like, whoops. Now we have a named function, and now we can pull that back in there. No. So that's what doing anonymous functions to initialize complex data means, and that's what it gives you. All right. Oops. Okay, so next tip. Don't feel the need to use classes. Don't need classes. Unless you want methods. So let's just say you have an object type. Say you have a person, right? Say the person, so one way you could do this is you could say class person, and then you could say constructor, and then you can say like age, name, or name age, and XY location, say like their location in the world, so like this.name equals name, this.age equals age, and maybe there's like a new way of doing this more quickly in JavaScript I don't know about, but you have some it's just kind of tiresome, like this kind of boilerplate. It's not very exciting to do that. But then you can get like methods, so methods are nice, I guess, maybe. So, but one way I would prefer to do this is say like build person. So you could do like const build person equals and then a function. And you could just return an object, and generally this works just as well in JavaScript. In TypeScript, it might be interesting debate here. There might be some real advantages to using a named class. But even then in TypeScript, you can name your interfaces, your object types. So what I mean by that is, okay, so instead of doing this, you could just return, so say you could say name, age, XY. So you don't need a person like sort of class. You can just return an object with all the named fields, and it'll work exactly the same way. You just can't do methods. So only con is it's cleaner and quicker this way, less code. Pros are less code, cons no method. So you can't say like get children or something, right? You'd have to write a function like get children. You have to write a free function, and we can talk about methods another day. So in TypeScript, though, you kind of do the same thing when you're doing like a class and an interface. You can just say like something like TypeScript. You can sort of have the best of both worlds. You can say like interface person, and then you can basically take this object and turn it into a named type. So without having the overhead of a class. So you just have like name string or something. I don't know exactly TypeScript. And x or number, xy number, and then that would be like your interface in TypeScript that sort of hedges between the sort of typedness of this person class and also the simplicity and the conciseness of just a vanilla object. But generally prefer this until you need methods. So I'd say prefer until you need methods or gasp inheritance. But that's probably, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a case in JavaScript where you really need inheritance, in my opinion. But I could be wrong. Okay, fifth tip. So I've kind of hinted at this tip, but the gist of this tip is that in JavaScript, you can really move from concrete to abstract by saying clumps of variables. So on the left of the concrete spectrum is like clumps of variables, right? And then you go to like an object with name field. And then you might have a class or something. So the way you go from clumps of objects to variables, clumps of variables to objects in JavaScript is very intuitive, but I also think that syntactically it leaves a bit to be desired. So I'll show you what I mean. So, okay, so let's say you have a bunch of variables equals. So say this represents like your position in world space, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, this should probably be like its position object. So now we want to say the position equals, so instead of taking this, you're going to put this in here, and then you're going to turn these into fields. The only problem with JavaScript, it's not so clean to transition from a assignment to a field assignment, because you have to change both the semicolon and the equals sign. So I would love there to be more thought placed in a language where you can quickly transition from a variable declaration to a field name. But you'll find yourself doing this a lot in JavaScript, where you have clumps of variables, and then you go from there into objects. And then if you really need a class, then you go from objects to classes. So it's really simple. The sort of layers or levels of abstraction that you can achieve in JavaScript are really kind of lined up for you. The only thing I would say that is annoying is that it's just annoying to go from object to declaration and declaration to object. You have to change two things. You have to change both the colon to an equal sign and the semicolon to comma. Why? Why can't we just... Okay, anyway, whatever. Okay, 6. So global state is okay, and use a single object to store it. So what I mean by this, well, JavaScript, you're pretty much going to have your global scope. You're going to have variables defined like your canvas or something, or, you know, in the global scope there's like document and window. Those are preloaded in there from the browser runtime, and then there's also going to be like your event handlers, so, and functions. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be in your global scope. But for like global state, like, let's just say like mouse position or something, I like to put them all in a variable. And it doesn't have to be named globals, it could be named anything, but you could be like mouse position, and then you could have your mouse position, right? Maybe like, and then all your globals can go in one object, and this is better than having a clump of globals. Like I was talking about before, you can go from clump of globals to single object of globals, which is clean. And then if you really need a destructuring, so you might say, oh, well, this is more typing, because if I wanted mouse pause, now I have to say globals.mouse pause. It's like, okay, well, there's a reason why we have namespaces in programming languages, because you don't want your scopes to get too cluttered with too many variables. But say I had a scope here, say I had like a function, like, say I had my function, right? And then they're like, okay, so I really want my mouse pause to do this. So you could say var mouse pause equals globals.mouse pause, but you can use destructuring to make this a little cleaner. So you could say, I don't exactly remember how this works, but something like this, and any other ones you want. So say foo, whoops. So you do something like that. And I believe that this is the syntax, and then now mouse pause and foo are now in your scope, but they don't pollute the global scope, so you don't end up with too many variables outside of that. It's only is temporary in the scope. So this is one way of doing things that I prefer over having multiple global variables just lying around. And then destructure if you want. So destructure if you want. So next tip. Don't pull dependencies unless you have reason to. This is more of a JavaScript problem than anything. I generally say that the JavaScript ecosystem has a lot of pretty bad packages and low quality code out there, but it's just one of those things where each of the libraries that you pull ends up having a hidden cost, and you don't know when you're going to necessarily meet that cost, but you likely will. And whether that's maintenance cost, or whether that's, oh shoot, the API of the library that I pulled doesn't exactly match what I want to do. Anyway, don't pull what dependencies unless you absolutely need to. Okay. 8. Don't get cute. I guess don't get cute's not really a actionable tip. I would say know what's slow and what's not. So know what's slow. Okay, what do I mean by know what's slow? Well, performance is a concern in JavaScript, and while engines like Node, V8, all that stuff they're pretty optimized. Like, you can get JavaScript to run probably faster than Python, because it's a simpler language, so you can really make it lean. But there's still a lot of hidden slowness in JavaScript. One of the biggest ones is splatting. So what I mean, I think it's called splatting, but it's say you have a array, and say you have 100,000 items. Say there's 1,000 items, right? And then say you have a function that takes a variable number of arguments, so varargs. I don't really know how varargs work in JavaScript, but say you have f const f equals something so say variable. I'm gonna look that up real quick. Variable number of arguments. Yeah. So if you go like this, and then do stuff. So it's a very bad idea to splat the whole array into this function. I'm not sure what the syntax is, but be really careful about stuff like this, because this, I think it'll copy the entire array onto the stack. So you don't want to do this. Whoops. Yeah. So know it's slow. That's one gotcha. There's many other gotchas that I'm not even really aware of. But for rule of thumb, what's slow on computers? What makes computers slow? What operations are really slow? So I would say the biggest operation that's slow is memory allocation. So that's new. So one way to sort of, what happened to my Emacs? Say you're spawning new document div elements or something. Well, it might not be good to spawn 100,000 divs in a loop. Maybe you should try to take the memory allocation outside the loop. Memory allocation, this is the slowest thing that you often need to do on a computer. So superlinear algorithms. So n squared, n cubed. Maybe not n log n, but you know what I'm talking about. Stuff like this. That's gonna be slow. And then what's also slow is copies. Lots of copying memory. But basically, if you sort of keep track of these things, your JavaScript's going to be pretty fast. Just don't do anything silly like the splatting that I was talking about. Okay. Last tip. What is the last tip? Where am I? Okay. Oh, my last tip I already mentioned, but if you really hate typing, then destructure. So I'm not even going to write this down, but like I said before, destructure if you want. It can save you some typing. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have any other tips for JavaScript. JavaScript's a language where you can move fast. You can shoot yourself in the foot. But it's also a language where you can get stuff done extremely quickly, unlike any other language that I found. So that may be the reason why it's basically the only language anybody uses to do anything anymore. And alright, that's it.